Martina here, and in this episode we're going to talk about leather and how to attach it to your book. Now, leather has to go through a process of tanning before you can use it to make anything, which just means it has to be stabilized and made long-lasting. And there are mainly two ways of tanning leather, which is chrome tanning and vegetable tanning. So chrome tanning uses chemicals to treat the leather, and that is, most of the leather on the market today is chrome tanned, while vegetable tanned uses ingredients such as tree bark and other things to stabilize the leather. Now, for bookbinding you want to use vegetable tanned leather, and there are a couple of reasons for that. So first of all, chrome tanned leather can't be tooled or carved. You can emboss it and deboss it because that simply requires you to wrap it around something, but you cannot make any other type of impressions on it. You can't use stamps, carving tools, anything like that. And that is a big minus for a lot of bookbinders. Secondly, you can't pare chrome tanned leather, which means shaving off some of the backside of the leather, and that is quite important to make it easier to wrap around corners and around edges of the book. And third, vegetable tanned leather will develop a nice patina over time, which chrome tanned will not do, because the vegetable tanned leather will take impressions from things like water and other scratches, and also the color variations in the vegetable tanned leather will contribute to this patina. And finally, this might seem like a bit of a superficial detail, but I think it adds to the overall experience of a book, and that is the smell. You know that particular leather smell? That is vegetable tanned leather. There are several other differences between chrome tanned and vegetable tanned leather, but these are the most important ones for making a book. So now the question is, what kind of leather should you go for? The most common leather to use in bookbinding is goatskin or calfskin leather that is vegetable tanned. It doesn't really matter much what kind of leather it is as long as it's vegetable tanned, and it's somewhere between 0.5 and 1 millimeter in thickness. It has to be this thin to be able to wrap it around the spine and the edges of the book nicely. As leather can be quite expensive, it can be a good idea to get hold of some secondhand leather, such as leather coats or bags. Although it's a good chance that is going to be chrome tanned leather, you can still use it with the same binding method, you just can't tool or pare it. You can still make some pretty cool designs without carving or tooling by using, for example, embossing and rivets and gold leaf and maybe other metal ornaments to spice it up. Now, if you decide to buy some vegetable tanned leather, you can either buy it pre-dyed or you can dye it yourself. I personally prefer dyeing the leather myself, either with some natural colored stains with browns and blacks, or using more colorful dyes. But an important part of dyeing the leather yourself is to seal the surface, and I do this with some leather wax or some acrylic sealant. I've had a lot of questions about alternatives to leather, and as far as I know, there aren't any other materials that are as durable as leather is, but you can definitely use this type of binding method with any kind of fabric or faux leather you like. Now let's move on to attaching the leather. Before we attach the leather, we have to do the embossing. And to do that, I'm gonna use the backside of an old sketchbook because it had some really thick and nice cardstock. First of all, I make a couple of paper templates and check that they will look good on the book. And then I cut out all the pieces from the cardstock using a box knife. Now, before I start gluing any of the parts to the book, I make sure to find the exact center point of the cover and then align my centerpiece properly and also align all the corner pieces. Then I apply my regular bookbinding glue with a glue brush, make sure to align the pieces and press them down firmly, and then I put the book back into the book press to dry for a couple of hours. And I let this dry completely before moving on to the next step. Next I have to cut out a piece of the leather hide to use as the cover. I usually use this 1 millimeter thick goatskin leather. It's a bit on the thicker side because I really enjoy carving on my books. To be able to work with this kind of leather, I have to case it, which simply means just wetting it down so that the fibers soften up, and then I'm able to shape the leather. I then cut out the piece of leather I need and case the leather where the spine will be by spraying it on both sides with a bottle of lukewarm water. I let that sit and dry for a while until the color has almost reached its original dry state, but while still being damp, and then I apply glue to the leather. I make sure to not apply glue all the way to the ends of the spine, as I have to fold in the edges here later. If I was a bit more confident in my aligning skills, I would have paired the leather before attaching it to the spine, which just means thinning down the edges of the leather to make it easier to wrap around the edges. But at this point, I do it after gluing the leather to the book. After applying the glue, I try to center the spine as well as I can and pull it downwards over the book, which I have fastened in my book press. Now I have to use my bone folder to press down the leather in the center of the spine first, and I'll work my way from the center to the top and from the center to the bottom. I spend a good while rubbing the leather tightly around the ridges of the spine to really shape the leather. When I'm happy with the shape, I grab some thin cord and start wrapping it around the ridges, all the way around the book press. This part can be a bit tricky if you don't have a book press or a finishing press, but I have seen people do this by simply wrapping it around the book itself, and that has worked pretty well. So now I just have to leave that overnight to dry completely before moving on to the next step. So now that it's dry, I'll just cut off all the cords and take it out of the book press. At this point, I start paring the leather and cutting off any excess parts with a box knife. And also at the spine, I'm gonna cut it even shorter where I'll fold it in later. And then I have to case the leather again to be able to work with it. I always like to start with the back side to kind of get the hang of it and get into it again before I move on to the front side. That really has to be the pretty side. So when the leather is damp and ready to be worked, I apply the glue to the cover, grab my bone folder, and start working my way from the spine towards the foredge of the book. Again, I spent quite a lot of time rubbing the leather around all the edges of the embossing patterns to really make it stand out and rub it flat on the cover. Case the leather around the edges, fold them over and rub the fold for a bit before applying any glue. I like to use contact glue for this because this sets very quickly and it's fairly flexible and very durable. The contact glue has to be applied to both surfaces you want to glue, then dry for about 10 minutes until it's surface dry, and finally you can press the surfaces together. You can also use the regular bookbinding glue for this. The tricky part about folding the edges are the corners and cutting off just enough to make them align, and also folding the part at the spine. At the spine you have to wrap the leather over itself while at the same time wrapping it around the front and back cover. This part is actually easier than it looks if you just take your time to work with the leather. Make sure to really rub it around the ridges of the book and around the embossed patterns on the cover. So just to summarize, there is a pretty big difference between chrome tanned and vegetable tanned leather. And in bookbinding, the preferred leather is vegetable tanned leather that is between 0.5 and 1 mm in thickness. Now, with the bookbinding method used in this series, you can really use any cover material you want, but genuine leather is the most durable one. And finally, spend some extra time shaping the leather around the ridges on the spine and around the embossed patterns on the cover, because that will give the best results.